This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Ask the Expert, Everything in Place. Today, I'm really delighted that we're joined by Louise Johnson and Jen Beaumont, who are going to chat to us about lots of different ways that we can all prepare and put things in place for the end of our lives and make sure that we're organised and our loved ones know our wishes. And I'm going to hand over to Louise and Jen to tell us a little bit more about themselves.
Thank you. So my name's Louise Johnson. I've been at St Cuthbert's Hospice now for 7 years. And my first meeting with the chief exec, we had a conversation where he said, I would like you to run the Good Death Project, at which point you roll your eyes and think, oh my goodness, what have I let myself in for? You start thinking and having really deep deep thoughts about, is there such a thing as a good death? Is there a good death? People come to me and they say, well, maybe there's a better death and a worse death. What's the difference? And, it sets the agenda for a whole conversation about what makes a good death is actually good communication, people understanding a plan, people being on the same page, people being able to support each other. And, there's a lot of things that you can do that actually would make that an easier journey. So, we founded the Everything in Place project and we developed a course, and over the years it's grown and grown. And I'm really happy to be here to be able to tell you a little bit about it. My passion from this comes from my own journey, as I think, only a true passion will. I was widowed at the age of 34. My husband was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus when I was 36 weeks pregnant, I think I was. We were both in hospital at the same time. I was in one ward, he was in another ward. He had a massive surgery. He was in intensive care. I gave birth on my own. It was just one of the things that is just like not ideal. But, we managed. Anyway, we got through it. He lived for 6 months and then he died when, I had a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old baby. And, I was left in a bit of a mess. I was left in a pickle. I was left in this isn't supposed to be happening. This isn't right. There's no plan. On top of that, there was other complications. The house was in my name. The business was in his name. Everything just sort of hit the curbside, really, and the wheel came off. And I can remember having a day saying to myself, I can drink wine till I die, or I can actually get up and sort this out. And, there's so much strength comes from that. And so I haven't, I'm not on the same path as you all maybe, but I've sort of been on the journey and I have got a real understanding of the issues, the conversations, the family stuff, and it comes from experience. So before I take over the whole session, I'll pass over to Jen.
Thanks, Louise. So I'm Jen Beaumont. I'm one of you fellow mummies. I was diagnosed with a triple negative breast cancer at 38 weeks pregnant. Found my lump at 28 weeks, and the midwife said, oh, blocked milk duct, just massage it in the shower, it'll be fine. It wasn't fine. I was diagnosed and told I had to give birth to Jack straight away. So I was admitted the following day and Jack was born the following day. So it's like a whirlwind, as I'm sure you're all aware. But you think at that point you're going to get through it and everything will be fine. I'll have my operation, I'll have my chemo, I'll do whatever it takes. And unfortunately, after my chemo and my mastectomy, I was given the news that my cancer had spread to lymph nodes in my chest. I had a tumour in my lung and one in my neck. And I was given a really dark prognosis. I was given 12 to 24 months to live because of the tumours in my chest. If they'd carried on growing at the speed at which they were growing, they would have stopped me from breathing. I was given that news when Jack was 7 months old. And out of my relationship with my husband, I'm the doer. I pay the bills. I was the breadwinner. I was the one who sorts the Christmas Eve boxes and birthday presents, and everything just goes running through your head of how am I going to get through this and how is Stuart going to cope? Stuart's my husband. And somebody gave me Louise's number and said, ring Louise, she'll help you through getting things in place. And at first I was really scared. I am a doer. My job was a project manager. I like my lists. I like things to be in place. And I felt like if I had my list and things to do, that I still remained in control. So Louise helped me. We went through the Everything in Place booklet. We talked about how to get things in order. And I started with simple things that didn't take a lot of emotion. So bills, all the bills were in my name. And then we worked on through things into the more difficult bits, the memory boxes, making things for the kids for when they're older. That's the bit that's difficult. But putting a bill from my name into my husband's name doesn't take much doing. You don't have to think about it. But thinking about your children growing up or attending your funeral, that's a whole different ballgame. But it's much easier to do it in advance. That's what I say to people. Like, I'm in a much better place now. My cancer's stable. 12 to 24 months has gone out the window. Until my cancer starts growing again, I'm okay. But I've ticked a lot of things off my list, and they're done. They're in a box, and I don't have to think about it anymore. And I think if other mums can benefit from me helping them get to this position where things are done and in a box, you can enjoy the current moment. Like this weekend, we've been making memories of the Platinum Jubilee, and I haven't thought about any of the dark stuff because a lot of it's done and put away in a box. So that's what made me then contact Mummy Star to see if we could help the mummies in the same way that Louise has helped me.
Thank you. I have a question, if you don't mind me just starting off with while it's fresh in my mind. Do you think, in terms of the approach to this and having everything in place, it's something that we, and you might go in, you're probably going to go into this anyway, that it's something that we probably, it shouldn't take really bad news like you've received to start thinking about these things, and we should just be more aware of these things anyway. And I come from a place very similar to you, Louise, sadly. But it's always struck me over the years that why do we wait until we receive very bad news or life-limiting news before we start to think about these things, rather than thinking, oh, actually, this could happen tomorrow. It could happen in an accident without any warning and any sort of preemption, but we don't think of it that way.
It's a whole culture thing. And, if I could do anything in this life, and Jen will know what I say, I'd want to change the world one person at a time, and just actually change the culture where we grow up knowing what mum and dad want, knowing what each other want. And actually, it's always really tough knowing what our kids want, because I've got 2 motorbikey kids, which is a nightmare. And I absolutely hate it. But that's their life and their choice, and they love it. But we have sat down and said, if this something happens, what are your thoughts on organ donation? What are your thoughts on? And I think while you can do it in a philosophical way, while it's not really happening, it's a much lighter conversation. It can be a little bit more humorous. It can be a little bit like, well, we talk about my funeral, I want to be set up in a rocket, or I want to, because it can be fun. You can have the conversations. And I've said to my one of my courses, I'd love to go up in a rocket, but the visions of me landing on next door shed for the rest of my life is just not a place I want to be. So you've got to think it through. And I think, to me, there's several times when you turn that corner where it becomes a problem. One is that you get a diagnosis of something that's nasty. You've turned the corner. You lose a loved one. You turn the corner. You get up and you feel old and vulnerable. You've turned the corner. Once you have something that makes it more of a reality, wherever direction that comes from, you're already in a harder place. And then it only becomes harder because it becomes more realistic and closer. So the time I target audience ideally is people who are fit and well and happy to plan death, life, later life, whichever way you look at it, whatever you call it, it's that phase. It can have any name, and the death word is still a massive taboo. Yeah. But we use it to break it down. And if you do an 8-session course talking about death and dying, at the end of that course, you'll have an easier conversation about death and dying just because the words are not so scary. But it is a massive part of the culture of actually what we do and what we're about. Totally.
A lot of my friends now, I've had those conversations with their husbands. Like my husband, Stuart, he didn't want to know. He was very much a head in the sand. And some people are head in the sand, but it's made my best friend and her husband sort everything out, because she was like, well, what if something happens? And it just creates that conversation, and it's so much easier. So my friend and her husband had a conversation with no tears, because neither of them are poorly, neither of them have got anything going on, but it made them put things in place. Whereas I couldn't have that conversation with Stuart, because all he kept saying was, I don't want you to go. I don't want you to go. So if you can have that conversation while you're all well, there's not
you're not
that
going
emotion.
anywhere.
Yeah, there's not that emotion. And we've since picked up the conversation. Now that I'm stable, Stuart's now then said, right, what have you planned? I think I better know. Whereas at the time, he was just like, do it, and I'll just follow your instruction. But now he's like, right, I need to know, and he's listened, and we've talked about it. And yeah, it's still hard, because nobody wants to talk about losing a wife or a husband, but it's not as difficult because I'm not as poorly.
I remember the first time I went down to see Jen and Stuart, and Stuart couldn't look at me. It was so hard, and it was hard for me because I knew where they were, but it sort of, you just got to keep going. You kind of just not do it because it's not pleasant. It's much better done. And so you just have to find a way through and, take breaks, prioritize conversations, do a bit at a time, pick one thing a week, a month, whatever you're coping with, make the plan fit you.
And you can do all 8 sessions with Louise. You don't have to, like Louise said, do them all, because I just picked the ones that were, like, I didn't even talk about organ donation. Like, I've got cancer, it's not really an issue. So we just ignored that bit, but we focused on the other things, like, is our will how we want it to be? What do we want on my funeral? Do we want the kids there? Do we not? Do I want to go into a care home? Big thing for me is I don't want to die at home. I'm at home is where my kids are. I want them to remember me shouting, come on, your breakfast's ready, not mum being really poorly. So from day one, I wanted the GP and everybody to know that hospice is where I want to die. And having that conversation, it was just like, I don't want to talk about it. And then when I told Louise that's what I wanted, after Louise had gone, Stuart said to me, well, I'd have just brought you home because I just thought that's what you would have wanted. But because we'd not had that conversation, he got really upset with himself because he said I'd have done the wrong thing. So, but there's not a right or a wrong because we hadn't had that conversation. But help with having Louise there and having this course to follow made us have that conversation. Just makes things easier.
I think there's a drip feed effect, isn't there? I think sometimes with partners that it's mentioning it is one thing, and allowing somebody the time to process and react, and then revisiting the subject again when they're a little bit more potentially welcome to listen and be able to take it on board. Whereas I think sometimes, because there is not to want to stereotype all partners, but I think certainly it's more prevalent in male partners, is that there is that kind of cut and run. Oh God, I didn't expect this. What do I do now? And it's hard to sit and soak up. Whereas I think if it comes out of the blue totally, I think you get one of either the fight or flight response to it. You either do stay there and soak it up because you literally have nowhere else to turn, or you have to just run away and come back to it at a point where you're ready for it. But I think I'm conscious we're chatting, and I don't want us to distract from from you actually sort of talking through the intricacies of the actual course itself. So shall I sort of stop this recording and then start a fresh one where you're in terms of sort of actually going through the course itself? Lisa, sorry, I think I cut you off there. Did you were saying something?
No, all I was going to say is, as I've mentioned to Louise before, I'm trying to kind of follow your instructions, if you like, and I'm really interested in doing the course, not just in a professional capacity in my role at Mummy's Star, but for me as in my personal life. And I just think breaking things down into chunks, like Jen was saying, and just covering everything you know, I just think it sounds so important and valuable, and just a really, you know, great way to get your plans in place. And so yeah, I just think it's definitely something that I'm interested in. It sounds brilliant.
I think bringing the age down, I think, on these subjects as well. You know, I think that's probably the big issue, is people under their 30s, in their early 30s, or, you know, they don't routinely think about things like wills, death and dying, and critical illness cover. And I remember years ago when Maya and I had our first child, the instinct was, right, well, we have a child now, we have to have some kind of cover. And I remember somebody asking me the question about a year after her death, and said, well, what made you guys take out the cover? And it was like, well, we had a child. There had to be a level of security and responsibility. But I think it's only in the last 5 years or so that even I've seen much more of an open conversation about, you know, it's good to have, it's a safeguard, it's, you know, it helps you sort of, in the worst case scenario, whatever the nature of it is, it just offers you that potential cushion, while potentially you're talking to somebody about some of these kind of conversations, you know, where you've got take one worry away, and then you've got to get your head around, you know, everything that we're talking about in terms of the course content and those decisions and the knowings and not knowings of, you know, what people's wishes are and everything. Right, let me stop there.